Swami Namaste Saraswata Devi Gauravani Prakaranai Nirvishesha Nivari Pasam Charishatarane Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Gadadhar Shri Gaur Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare. So this is a short presentation on life after death, Re-incarnation, Beyond Birth and Death. Prabhupada has written a short book called Beyond Birth and Death, which is actually from a series of lectures on the 8th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, where Arjuna asks the question about what happens when we die. So that's where the title comes from. So, of course, birth happens, children are born, and this is usually celebrated, birthdays, to celebrate children being born. We also have studies, so many studies of how children are produced and genetically, how they are made, etc. Genetics and childbirth, etc. So many studies are there. And we have death. Death also happens as frequently as birth. Everyone is born dies, so the amount of deaths are equal to the number of births. Death isn't celebrated in the same way. Usually it's the opposite. There's a lot of mourning, etc. But we do see that it is also very significant that there's usually ceremonies associated with death. And even for atheists and other people like that, they have some sort of ceremonies. Yeah? So even in the communist countries, they had these huge monuments to the dead leaders, like Lenin and Stalin, etc. Huge monuments were there to commemorate them. So the death, of course, for others in other countries there are many ceremonies associated with death. Most primitive societies will have a death ceremony. And in India, probably the most complicated death ceremony is there. It goes on for 13 days, and then it goes on for a month, and every month there's ceremonies, and then every year there's ceremonies, so it goes on infinitely, death ceremonies. It's a very complicated ritual, more complicated than any other rituals. Marriage is like maybe a 3-day ceremony, maybe a week maximum, but then death ceremonies go on longer than that. So that's the longest ceremony of all, among all the samskars. But unlike the other samskars, it's not put together with them. If you have a book of samskars, they don't include this ceremony. The death ceremony is not there. It's in a separate book. It's not considered very nice to put them together. But nevertheless, there's a great significance given to this in India, at least. Not in other countries, maybe in India. Why this significance? Because people really don't understand the nature of death. And therefore, they try to somehow preserve the presence of the person through monuments and so many other things. More important, of course, than the birth or the death is what happens in between. That's your life. Now, life itself is a little bit of a problem. Defining life. So life for the scientists, actually, there is no definition. Really. Ultimately, there isn't. It just kind of happens. They can define the body and how it's produced out of chemicals, and they get together and we make amino acids combine, and they make things, and eventually we get cells combine, eventually we get bodies, yeah? And then we get, in the bodies, we have different cells for different things like bones and blood and muscles and nerves and brains and organs, etc. All made out of chemical combinations. What is life? No definition, really. So it's very strange. The most significant part of the body is the life in it, but yet that cannot be defined by science. So, nevertheless, scientists do make funny attempts to analyze everything. So we have people like chemists, and they can start analyzing your human body, and all the chemicals. And we get calcium and iron and phosphorus and water and salt and so many other things. And that's who you are. You're the sum total of all this. This doesn't make much sense, because what does it come to? It's not much. Less than $1. So actually we're not worth anything in terms of chemicals. But nevertheless, people won't believe that. And so they believe they're worth more than chemicals, than $2 worth of chemicals or something. They're really worth more than that. But nevertheless, if we coldly analyze everything, it doesn't really make much sense. So chemical analysis is not very nice. So we're still left. We'll still ask the question, who are we? We're not chemicals. So we can go to biology, and then we get Darwin's theory of evolution. And so what are we? We evolved from simpler life forms by accident and chance. That's the theory. Okay? There's no divine will involved, nothing. It's just that little molecules got together over billions and billions of years, and by chance they formed into complicated molecules which formed into amino acids, and amino acids got together over millions and millions of years and formed into cells, and the cells gradually multiplied in various ways, and they form more complex cells, etc., until we get plants and animals, and the animals over time changed and mutated until we get human beings, all by chance. That's the theory. Unfortunately, if we use the law of chance to calculate the time it would take to form a one-celled creature, it will take longer than the whole existence of the Earth. So to get a complicated creature, it will take much, much longer. So anyway, even according to the rules of science, it doesn't really work if it's just chance. So anyway, that is the idea. By chance we just evolved. So then, what is it? There's no life there also. Is this an evolution of chemicals again? You take the chemicals from the chemist, the nitrogen, the phosphorus, and all these, combine them into amino acids, and then you shake it all around for billions of years, and then you get cells, supposedly. And those form into complicated things like human beings eventually. And so all of these life forms actually don't mean anything except chemicals again. So it's back to the same thing. Chemicals are worth 200 rupees. So this whole evolution itself, again, is not very satisfying. Of course, somehow or other, the urge of somehow the law of evolution is that it gets more and more complicated. Yes, the creatures get more complicated when actually they should get simpler. Because everything degrades according to Vedic system. Everything goes towards tamagun and destructive, so they get simpler and simpler, but actually everything gets more and more complicated. Very strange. So anyway, the human being, we think, is the end product of all of this. That we are the final product, by chance, of all of this. So we should be the most advanced of all. So even that is subject to debate. Are we advanced or not? So are we evolving or devolving? If we look at the Vedic literature, they tell us, no, we're devolving because we go from Satya Yuga, Treta Yuga, Dwapara Yuga, Kali Yuga, and as we do that, we get less and less intelligent. So naturally we become worse and worse. And if we look at the modern world, we're the most advanced in the modern world. In other words, people 2,000 years ago weren't as advanced as we are, and the people 4,000 years ago were less advanced. So technically we should be advancing, getting better, somehow or other. But better at what is the question. So if we examine ourselves, then we'll find that actually our advancement is we get better and better at destroying ourselves. We can have wars, and then we invent more and more weapons to destroy ourselves. That's basically the advancement of human beings. If we look at science, science, of course, is the main, we can say, is the main study in the universities, I think, isn't it? Yeah? That's where the money is, in science. And then, why is science supported, ultimately? And if we look around, eventually, where does all the money go? It goes into making weapons. And what are the weapons for? To kill other human beings. So this is probably the most foolish thing, because with these weapons we can wipe out the human race. So what kind of advancement is that? Is that intelligence or not? We do not see World War I or World War II of the cats and the dogs. Yeah? They don't annihilate their own species, but human beings in the Second World War, they killed 40 million people. How is it possible? If we're so advanced that we kill our species off like this, where animals don't. Dogs don't do that. Cats don't do that. Birds don't do that. Cockroaches don't do that. Rats don't do that. But human beings do this. We have big wars. Now, something is wrong. We're not really advanced at all. So, biology doesn't really give us an answer that who are we, because we ultimately it talks about evolution, but it looks like we're not evolving at all. We're going in the opposite direction. So, if we take chemistry and biology, we go behind them, we find behind both of those sciences is another science called physics, which is the basic science, upon which chemistry and biology and everything else is based. And then we get astrophysics, which is a theory about how the whole universe gets formed. So if we examine that theory, we can try to find a meaning to human life also, but if we look at it, actually does the opposite. So the physicists come up with all sorts of theories which we cannot prove. And we have a whole universe, which is something, this huge figure here with 21 zeros after it. Huge astronomical figure which we can't even think of. Most of it is space, and in that space then we got galaxies like this. And in each galaxy there's about 100 billion galaxies with 100 million stars in each galaxy, which are all like suns, and those suns have planets around them. So the possibilities of life actually are kind of infinite in the universe, considering the amount of galaxies and the number of suns and planets everywhere in the universe, which we don't know about and we can't even get to. So they try to explain how all of this came about. And what is theory came about by chance again. Nothing particular, except somehow or other there's a big explosion and it all happened, finished. And at a certain time it all disappeared again. But no reason for it to exist. And then among all these different galaxies, we got our particular Earth and this particular galaxy and a particular solar system, a little Earth there, and on the Earth, and we got different countries like India and Australia, etc. And then all these countries, we got little people running around. So, what does that life mean? In terms of physics, nothing. I mean, it just as a result of the Big Bang, and consequently the evolution took place, and then finally humans form and they can disappear again. So in all these types of science, life itself really has no meaning. So, of course, even in elementary school, I think probably all the elementary schools in the world will teach Darwin's theory of evolution. This somehow has become very, very popular. The end result of that theory, of course, is that life is meaningless. That's the conclusion such a theory is accepted. So the funny thing is, of course, though this theory is being taught in schools for the last 100 years or so, I guess now, yeah. And everywhere in the world from a young age they're taught this theory. And if you don't believe it, you're considered to be some sort of heretic or something. So, in spite of that, and the conclusion that goes with it, life is meaningless, there's no God, no creator, still, people tend to be spiritual and religious for some reason. In spite of all that. They shouldn't be, because this whole theory is saying there is no creator, there is nobody behind anything, it's just all chance. Yet still, people become religious. It's very strange. So they're still everybody still asks these questions in spite of science. Who are we? Why do we exist? Where do we come from? Where are we going? What is birth? What is death? These questions we ask. They've been asked in the past. We find these questions in the Upanishads, in Bhagavad Gita, thousands of years ago. We find them in the present day. And in the future, people are going to ask the same questions. And, of course, the answer in science is given, but it doesn't satisfy anybody. That's why we still ask the questions. So if we really accept science, then we have a very nice answer to all these questions. Where we come from? Well, there's no meaning to life at all. There's no answer. It just happened, that's all. There's no meaning. So, but nobody wants to accept that. Right? So we do feel that there is some other purpose for being there. Oh, what is it? And so, we can go on this. We can give all sorts of answers and be unsatisfied. So, since science can't help us, we have to go to another source. So, that source is the scriptures. We have the Vedic knowledge. Veda means knowledge. So it is a source of knowledge, particularly about to answer these questions. Who we are, what is our purpose, etc. We can't get the answer from science. We can't get it from university. So, if we look at Bhagavad Gita, then we'll find the answer comes out very simply and very quickly at the very beginning of the Bhagavad Gita. When Krishna first speaks, he opens his mouth and he gives us a very nice answer to the whole thing. As the embodied soul continually passes in this body from boyhood to youth to old age, the soul similarly passes into another body at death. So what he says essentially is you're not the body. So scientists say you are the body and the body is nothing. It's just a matter of chance. So they're trying to define life in terms of a material body. That's science. Bhagavad Gita takes the opposite. Life has got nothing to do with the body at all. It's got to do with the Atma, which is completely different from the body. So, in other words, the body keeps changing from boyhood to youth to old age. The soul doesn't change. The soul leaves the body. The soul takes another body again. So, completely different concept. So that, of course, is represented in many pictures in the Bhagavad Gita, where we have the soul and the baby, and the soul and the growing boy, and the soul and the adult, and the soul and the old man, and the dead man, and then it jumps into another body again. The soul is a little spot there. So the soul continues. It doesn't die at all. And it's separate from that body. The body changes, and the soul doesn't. That which pervades the entire body you should know to be indestructible, no one is able to destroy that imperishable soul. So here we have a completely different concept of who we are. We're an eternal conscious being who lives in the body. Now, we may not accept that because we're so conditioned by science. So, okay, can we see the soul? We take a microscope and whatever and look inside the body. Can we find that soul somewhere running around there doing something, you know? No. Something spiritual cannot be perceived by a material instrument, even the eye or a microscope. They cannot perceive something spiritual. So it's impossible. So then, how do we get faith? So very conveniently, scientists themselves have given us a little faith. So there's some indirect evidence, even in science, that the soul exists and it goes from body to body. Dr. Ian Stevenson, he was a psychiatrist, and he was an atheist also. He got interested in children who seemed to have recollections of a previous life. And sometimes children will start speaking and they say, no, I'm so-and-so person, so-and-so village, my mother's so-and-so, father's so-and-so, and they check it out and they find it so. So why children have these strange memories? Not India sometimes, other countries also. So what is this? Because he's a psychiatrist and was dealing with brains and all this, so he's wondering why children get these strange stories. Where does it come from? So he investigated 2,600 cases of memories of past lives. And he did it not to prove anything, but just to try to analyze why it happens, you know. And he wasn't believing in soul or God or anything. So he just did it very scientifically. He set up, standards, interviews, etc., and things like this, and very analytically set up a series of questions, etc., investigated cases personally wherever he could. And after he got all that information together, then his conclusion was, in all cases, I think a rational person can believe in reincarnation on the basis of the evidence. Which means that the children are not lying, but they're actually remembering a previous lifetime. They went from one body to another, and that's his conclusion. He said, this is based on the evidence, not upon my being religious or anything, because he wasn't. But after he studied his cases, he got convinced that actually we're not the body. So that's an indirect evidence, because it's based on testimony of small children who have memories. It's not that you can see everything. It's just a testimony of experience of children. There may be two streams of evolution, the biological one and the personal one. In other words, the personal one means the soul is taking new experiences and learning life after life as it goes from body to body. Huh? So that was his conclusion. Now, in the course of that investigation, here we have the Bhagavad Gita showing this, that we actually go from body to body in this way. You see there's death there and the person's dying, and then the other figure there is life and somebody's being born. And in the background we have an infinity sign. That means we get born, we die, we're born, we die, born, die again and again. So the soul is going life after life, like this. Okay, so in the Bhagavad Gita, we also have a very interesting statement. In chapter 8, Krishna says, whatever state of being one remembers when he quits his present body, in his next life he will attain that state without fail. So when you're dying, you have a very strong image in your mind. That can make your body, your next body. So we have the case of Bharat. He thought of a little deer when he was dying, because he was very attached to the deer. So he became a deer in his next lifetime. So that shows that the mind has power. Now we'll say, well, what about genetics and stuff like that? This is something completely different. It's the mind of the person will go into another body which is not genetically related at all, and start changing that body around because of his thoughts. Sounds very strange. But Ian Stevenson found this is kind of true in his investigations. The birthmarks which occur in a person when he's born, we have different birthmarks and the deformities of the body. They correspond with wounds caused during death in the previous lifetime. So there's one case here of a boy, and he remembered when he came out of the womb, he had these strange marks on his chest, white marks on his chest. Spots there. His parents didn't know what it was, didn't go away. Then when he was about 3 or 4 years old, he began talking about some other life, that he was actually another person in another village 100 miles away. And he identified father, mother, children, wife, etc. Place. The investigator found it was true also. So he also remembered how he died. He was shot by a shotgun. A shotgun has many bullets in it. So, in that investigation that the doctor did, then he found that there was actually, the police report also was there, the autopsy report. And that we see there. And the policeman drawed the body, and he showed where the bullet holes were. The pattern of bullet hole on the body of the man when he died. That same pattern is there on the boy. When he was born, on his chest, he had these marks all over his chest. A big one in the middle, and he had a big hole there, and then all the little ones around. Same pattern on his chest. And his family is not related with that family at all. So those marks did not come about by genetics. But we can say that somehow that dying experience, that imprint, somehow imprinted his next body. And that's not the only case. You found many cases like that. There's a case there we see with somebody has no fingers all in one hand. It's strange how they can just see like that. And in the previous life, that person remembers that as a child they were playing in the farm, with a sharp instrument and got all the fingers cut off. And they died, bled to death. And then they're born and there's no fingers there. Another case of a girl. She was run over by a train and her leg was severed just at the knee. And she bled to death. Next life she's born, there's no leg below the knee. Not there. In case of a boy here, he has no ear. So he remembers in previous life, he was shot in the head, his ear was blown off. This life, I have no ear and a big scar here up on his head. So how does this happen? It cannot happen by genetics at all. There's some other mechanism just carrying over that formation of the body. So this is one interesting phenomenon, which corresponds more or less to what Krishna is saying in Bhagavad Gita. You think of something when you die, that impression is going to somehow imprint your next body. So that is probably why in India, for dying people, they try to get them to chant the holy name, have something auspicious around them so they're not thinking all bad things. That way their next lifetime will be in a better body. So that's one area. Indirect, because based on evidence of little kids speaking or whatever, it's one method. But his disappointment, the doctor's disappointment was, well, I made this book as a scientist for scientists to read. My disappointment, he says, is that I cannot get a peer review from a serious scientist. They will not touch the book, because if they comment on it, then other people are going to point fingers at it and say, you're religious or something. So nobody wanted to say anything about the book. It's disappointing. Scientists actually are cowards. So, anyway, that's one type of evidence. Another area of evidence is near-death experience. This is... it happens, not all the time when people get injured, but sometimes during injury, operations, etc., accidents, they may actually stop functioning. Their brain brainwaves stop, heart stops completely for some time. And then they come back to life, remarkably, when they shouldn't, because if I think there's no oxygen in the brain for more than a minute or something, or whatever, I don't know. Essentially, you're finished. You can't function. Okay. It's impossible to explain how they can get revived. Anyway, they come back to life. Now, more remarkable than that is that they have memories during the time when the brain wasn't operating at all. How is that possible? So, doctors became a little curious about that, and, since medicine is there, and doctors there, hospitals are there, and then we have the patients talking, then, over so many patients, the doctors found this repeated pattern of people talking about things like this, or where they have memories when they shouldn't have memories at all. So they got a little curious about this. So they started investigating. This is what we call the near-death experience. That during that time when they're supposed to be dead, they had experiences. So the doctors wanted to figure out, what is this actually? How can it happen if there's no brain operating at all? So many studies were done. It started probably in the 1960s or so. Different doctors began interviewing people who had these experiences. And then they found, actually, to their surprise, that it wasn't so uncommon, because people just don't talk about it so much, but it wasn't too uncommon. And at the same time, the experiences all had common elements, which is very surprising, because the people came from all sorts of backgrounds, in all conditions, in all countries. Some men, some women, all sorts of countries, different ages, different religions, different professions, whatever, illiterate, educated, all sorts of people have these experiences. And a common experience, a similar experience. That was surprising. So, some experiences, of course, are more complete than others. But generally what happens is they have an out-of-the-body experience. They can actually perceive themselves separate from their body. They're floating above their body. They separate from their body. And they can look at their body lying there. If it's in the hospital, they can see themselves on the operating table or wherever they are. Or if they've had an accident, they can, looking at the accident, they can see themselves lying on the ground there in the middle of the road someplace, an accident, and they can just
objectively look at it like this. So you can separate from their body. That's one experience. How they can do that. How you can perceive when you don't even have eyes. They can see the dead body with the dead eyes there down there, and they can see from another angle somehow. Very interesting. If they have an extended experience, then they start going through a tunnel. And there's a light at the end of the tunnel, like going into some other dimension. And at the end of the tunnel, they enter into this other world which is full of light. Of course, it's not physical light in this sense, but it's very, very bright, not dark at all. And in that world, there are things, and there are people also. And if they have an extended experience, of course, they'll feel great peace, and maybe they think they're in heaven or something like that. They may see people, and dead relatives even, who speak to them. They may see spiritual beings, or God, or Christ, or Buddha, or someone, angels, or whatever. Sometimes they get messages. The messages are actually spoken. It's like a telepathy. They think and you receive, and you think and you give messages back and forth by the mind. So you don't need language to communicate at that stage. And another common element is a review of the life. Your life from birth to death. You get a quick review of all the major events of your life. At that time, most people have a realization that life was useless. Everything they did was not really what they should have been done. It's like nothing really happened. They just grew up, got educated, got a job, and they died. Finished. So nothing happened really. That is because once they're out of the body and they're in this other world, they realize that that's got nothing to do with them, that body. That they're completely separate. And and they're in this state when they're out of the body and they're communicating with these other beings, they feel this is the real me. But when they're in the body, they forget that completely, and they're kind of identifying with that body, which now they say is meaningless. So in other words, they can understand they're not the body actually, and they live beyond the body. So these people, if they recover usually, and they keep that experience, then they do change their lives. Positively. So there's all sorts of theories. Okay, maybe these experiences are induced by the anesthesia or drugs or something like that. They get hallucinations, or due to the deprivation of oxygen, something happens to the nervous system. They get flashes of light, and so many other things happen. But still, how can it be common to all these types of people under different conditions? Why they have common experiences like this? Secondly, after the experience, why is it so positive? Because if you just take anesthesia or drugs or anything, you don't change for the better. You have euphoric experiences with drugs and you end up becoming addicted or something like that. That's what happens. But these people actually change for the better. And they become more broad-minded, more spiritual, understanding that they're not the body. They like to help other people in suffering conditions, etc. So they actually change their life a lot because of this experience. So this doesn't happen through drugs or just accidental turning off of your brain and getting hallucinations. So that's why some doctors say that the experience is real. They're not hallucinations. So one of the early researchers is Dr. Kenneth Reams. After the near-death experience, people believe the end of life does not exist. They believe in some sort of life after death. Death vanishes for them. There's only life. So in other words, we're not the body. Dr. Raymond Moody says, from my near-death research and my personal experiences, death is, in my judgment, simply a transition to another kind of reality. So in other words, we don't die, really. We just go from one body to the other. So this is testimony of scientists. They also, these doctors were not religious either. They were also atheists. And out of curiosity, because they hear these patients say things, they began investigating to their surprise, and they got these realizations that this must be true. So they believe the testimony of their patients, that they're actually telling the truth, and they had real experiences, not hallucinations. To help explain this, we have something in the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 15. Whenever the soul accepts or leaves the body, he takes these senses with him in the subtle body. So we were asking, how can you see when your senses are down there and you're up here? How can you see anything? So he says, you have a subtle body with your senses in it. A sukshma sarira. And when you go out, you take it with you. So, near-death experience, you can separate with your subtle body. With those subtle eyes, you can still see and smell and do whatever, hear. So essentially, even our physical body, our material body, is a little more complicated than modern science will believe, and therefore the theory of evolution itself is a little risky because it's only considered a very gross body, but here we have a subtle body. What's this got to do with evolution? It's hard to explain. So we have a gross body and we have a subtle body. And the subtle body has senses on it. Of course, higher than that is the Atma or the soul. But as long as we're in a conditioned state, the soul takes the subtle body with it when it goes out of the body. Therefore, you can have perceptions even when the other body is not functioning. And that's an explanation that we can give. That subtle body actually is very complicated, and it is very useful also, very functional. It stores all of our past experiences and desires and physical features and karma, etc. Different things are stored there, and they go with us life after life, and they can be useful to us in many circumstances. Okay. So, the mentality, likes and dislikes, can go from one body to the other. So the subtle body can store all of these. It's like our brain stores memories in this lifetime. Subtle body will store them and transfer to the next body. We can't take our brain with us, but the subtle body goes with it. So then our likes and dislikes in one life can get into the next lifetime. So if we're afraid of water in one lifetime, that can carry over into the next lifetime due to the subtle body. Like that. So sometimes people have paranoia of something or fears, irrational fears of something, which have no relationship to anything in this lifetime. That could be previous lifetime. They have that experience. Therefore, they have some problem in this lifetime. So that's one thing. Impressions carry over. And they may carry over they may be held there for thousands of years and surface suddenly. There's a case of a woman in New York City. She had a phobia, a great fear of staying in a room with the windows closed. She was a nurse in a hospital, so she had to keep all the windows closed, otherwise she would freak out. So she didn't know why this was happening. She went to the doctor. The doctor interviewed her, psychiatrist, couldn't find anything. Interviewed her early life. She didn't have any problems, happily raised, etc. And then he thought, I'll put her under hypnosis because probably she's hiding her early childhood memories and fears, etc. Put her under hypnosis. Again, couldn't find anything. So he wondered what to do. She was still under trance. Then she began speaking in her trance, and she began describing weird things. She began describing how she was in this dark stone room, and she was putting oil on her hands and rubbing it on these statues. The statues had animal heads, human bodies. Describing all sorts of strange things. The doctor didn't know what she was talking about. Anyway, she kept talking. And then she said, all these sick people are coming here. They're pulling all these sick people and they're leaving them in this place. And then she also said, I'm getting sick too. And then she described how the people who were not sick, they dragged all the people who were sick up into the mountains. And they put them all in a cave. And she was also put in that cave. And then they sealed the mouth of the cave with a big rock. That's where her last memory was. She was lying in that cave, and she could see them pushing the rock over the cave and sealing it up. And then finally there was no light left. And then she said, well, it's dark in here. And then she said, I'm getting weaker and weaker and weaker. And then she said, I'm leaving my body now. So the oxygen ran out in there, and then she died. And then after some time he says, oh, then she started, I'm getting in another body again. And she began describing another experience like this. So anyway, doctor woke her up and sent her home. Anyway, he brought her back a few weeks later and actually, he put her under hypnosis again. So she actually remembered about 50 lifetimes over 3,000 years or so, 4,000 years. So her first life was in Egypt. She was a priestess in a temple, and that's when she got sick, and she was put in the cave, and she was sealed up there. And that memory of being sealed up and having no windows or doors, that affected her in this lifetime. So that's why she has fear in this lifetime. So it carried over 3,000, 4,000 years and came out this lifetime. So memories can hold on that long. So that's one thing. The memories and experiences are held in that subtle body. Another thing is the bodily features. We saw the case of the wounds. Somehow the subtle body will get affected by those wounds on the gross body, and then it will imprint again on the next body. So if you get your arm cut off, the subtle body arm will not be there. That subtle body goes to the next body, and we'll say no arm, so you don't get an arm. Like that. So impressions of physical features are held there. Now there's a very interesting case. This Jeffrey Keane, photograph taken in 1995, is a fireman in New York City. Through a series of funny coincidences, he looked in a book one day about the Civil War of America, which was 100 years earlier, and he saw this picture of General Gordon, and then he thought he recognized his own face there. 1860 photograph. This general was fighting in the Civil War. And so he got very curious about this whole general, and he researched his life and everything. And then he saw the pattern of his life was quite similar. When General Gordon went to the hospital, he went to the hospital. Even though they couldn't find anything wrong with him, somehow he ended up sick in the hospital, you know. They discharged him, they couldn't figure out what was wrong, but he was having pain in his body because 100 years earlier, this general actually was wounded in a battle and had to go to the hospital. So, many similarities in life, and etc. And not only similarities in that regard, personality traits, handwriting was the same. Many, many similarities he found. And the funny thing is he has a friend in the fire department, this Wayne Zaletta, and General Gordon had a friend, this Cutlass Wilcox in 1860 also, and he also looks very similar. So it looks like the two friends reincarnated together as firemen when previous they were generals. So this is rather astonishing, you know, that all the features, they're not genetically related to those families 100 years ago at all, but they have the same features. So the features carried over the subtle body into them in this lifetime. So we have similarity of physical appearance carried over through the subtle body, personality traits carried in the subtle body, writing styles, all this in the subtle body, karmic group that came together. So it looks like the subtle bodies get attached somehow. Those attachments may stay for long periods of time, and then again in the future bring those people together. And he began having past life memories also, those previous battles with the generals. That's a case of quite astonishing resemblance. And in the subtle body we have karma, which means if you do selfish acts which cause suffering to others in one lifetime, you will get similar suffering in a future lifetime. So that effect is held in your subtle body, and it will attract circumstances when you're in another body so that you get suffering. So, interesting. If you cause injury to somebody else, then you get an injury on yourself. Somehow or other it has to happen. And so that's the law of karma. So that karma is held in your subtle body. And therefore we have a nice definition of meat given in the Bhanu Samhita. Mamsa means meat. Okay? So the definition given there is the animal whose flesh I eat now will eat me in the future. I kill the animal will kill me. I inflict suffering, I will get suffering. So that is what Mamsa means. Mam means me, Sa means he. So, if we can realize that we're not the body and we're the soul, then what happens? We can actually get liberated from this birth and death cycle and whatever, and find a higher enjoyment, understanding that we're not the body or the soul. But, unfortunately, we get pulled away into ignorance by the senses, the mind, intelligence, and false ego. So So that's why generally in lifetime we don't even understand that we're the soul or different from the body. That's illustrated in the Upanishads, where it talks about the horses or the senses pulling the chariot of the body with the soul in it, with the intelligence as the driver, and the reins as the mind. The horses, unfortunately, are very wild, and they're just pulling the chariot all over the place. Like that. It's also explained in the Bhagavad Gita. For the person who meditates on the sense objects, attachment arises. From attachment arises desire. And if our desires are not fulfilled, we get anger. From anger arises bewilderment. From bewilderment comes loss of memory. From loss of memory comes loss of intelligence. From loss of intelligence, one is destroyed. Loss of intelligence means is that we cannot use our intelligence to judge what is right and what is wrong anymore. So we just do what we want to do because I like it. And because of that, we commit sinful activity. Because of that, we degrade ourselves and we can become animals. Whatever. So, we have, under ignorance, we have this endless chain or circle of the mind developing desires that turning into actions. We get little results that goes back into the mind. We say, this is good, that's bad. We develop new desires, new actions, new impressions. So this cycle goes on all day long, all night long. Keeps going on. This lust, anger, greed, impressions, all this goes on in the cycle. Very difficult to stop. It often creates habits. And habits, we know, are difficult to change. So the habits basically are just the mind developing a certain desire, expecting a certain result. And that gets stuck there somehow. I have to get this result. This is what I need. This is the result it's going to give. And it sticks with us, and then we do our activities. We get a result, and it doesn't go away. Even with our experience sometimes, those desires will not go away, and they stick with us. For long lifetimes even, they'll stick with us. We don't learn. So, this pushes us through the law of karma into another body, because each action gives karma. Each desire develops into action. Each action gives karma. Karma forces us to take another body to get the result. So we're pushed from birth to death, to life, to birth to death. We go back and we go round, around, around. So there's a repeated cycle, endless cycle of birth and death. We call samsara, like that. So because there's no beginning and no end, it's circular. So it's compared to a wheel of karma. This is a Buddhist representation of the wheel of karma here. It has 6 portions there. You can be a human being. If you do sattvic activities, you can go to heaven. You do rajasic activities, you become a demon. You do tamasic activities, you become an animal, or go to hell, or become a ghost. And above that, we have time function here. And in the center, we have snake, pig, and chicken. You can't see them too well there. And they represent lust, anger, and greed, which are causing us to do actions, causing us to do karma. So they're pushing us. It's making the wheel rotate and give us body after body in the material world. Okay. So, it is difficult to get out of this cycle of birth and death and karma and desire, etc. However, as a human being, it is possible to change. And the change will occur when we learn to choose our actions. And instead of being forced to act because our desires are like so and so. Because the desire is there, we must act in this way. So, when we have the ability to choose our act, then we can begin to change. So, according to the Varnashram system, and in the Gita in general, we have analysis of gunas, tamagun, rajagun, sattvagun. If we do tamasic actions, we end up as ghosts, animals, and hellish worlds. If we choose rajasic actions, we get human life or asuric life. If we choose sattvic action, we get heavenly life, the Svargaloka or something like that. So according to the actions we choose, we get different results. In other words, we can change our karma by choosing our actions. Of course, if we're in tamagun, it is more difficult to choose. Because we don't like the idea of choice at all. We simply like to do what we want to do and we don't want to change it all. So if we rise to rajas, we get a little more intelligence. So there's some ability, not too much. If we're in sattva, then we have very good chances of choosing. Okay? Because we're very detached from a situation by nature. So those who are sattvic actually have more opportunity to change and get out of karma than the others. Therefore, Jnana Yoga is for people of sattva good, because they can understand they're not the material body. So, at the bottom level we have the system of karma yoga to help us with these gunas here. Now people are born in different gunas, so somehow we've got to get them from the tamagun state up to the sattvagun state. But I said tamagun people are very difficult. So, therefore, rules are imposed. No choice. You just have to follow the rules, that's all. Okay. So, Sudras don't have choices. No money. They can't choose how to spend their money because they don't get any money. So the choices are very limited. If you get to Rajagun, you have more choices. You get to Sattvagun, you have more choices. But if you start at the bottom and follow the rules, gradually you can elevate through the gunas and get from Sattvagun to Rajagun to Sattvagun. So that's the whole theory. The soul can gradually elevate himself through the different varnas until he ends up as a Brahmana in Sattvagun. So that's one system. If we get to Sattvagun, which means that we're detached from material enjoyment, we can understand we're not the body, etc., we are qualified for Jnana Yoga. Understanding I'm not the body, I'm the soul. And this is basically a philosophical or intellectual analysis of everything by using Vedanta Sutras and Upanishads. We have Ashtanga Yoga. This is another way of realizing we're not the body and realizing the Atma by controlling the mind and the breathing process, and stopping the mental functions, etc. But a little difficult for us to do and dangerous also in the modern world. And then we have the process of Bhakti Yoga. This is the practical process for getting us beyond birth and death. So the main subject of Bhagavad Gita is Bhakti Yoga. So the process is different from these two processes. These two processes are denial processes. That is, stop action, stop desires, stop the mind. The process of bhakti is not stop, but to engage the senses and the mind in serving Supreme Lord. So we have processes like hearing, chanting, deity worship, etc. We don't stop the actions. We do actions directed towards the Supreme Lord. So, we see there are different processes here. We have Karma Yoga at the bottom. We have at the very bottom, we have Sakama Karma Yoga, doing Karma Yoga with desire for enjoying. So that's Tamagun and Rajagun. When we get to the top of Rajagun, we start doing Nishkama Karma Yoga. Karma Yoga with no desires at all, simply doing it out of duty. This raises it up to Sattvagun. When we're situated in Sattvagun, then we're qualified for Jnana and Ashtanga Yoga. But all of these processes are in the gunas. The only process beyond the gunas is Bhakti Yoga. And so this is the most powerful process, which will activate the soul more than anything else. So we have the senses and the mind and everything going towards ignorance and karma, etc. So the process of Bhakti Yoga changes things, directs everything towards the Supreme Lord. And in the process, the soul becomes activated. Atma becomes activated with devotion. So, what are the activities? Use the ear to hear about the Supreme Lord. Use the eye to see the Supreme Lord. You use the voice to glorify the Lord, kirtan. Use the nose to smell the incense offered to the Lord. Use the tongue to taste prasadam. food offered to the Lord. Use the body to dance for the Lord. We can use the mind to meditate on the Lord. So instead of stopping everything, we engage everything in Krishna. Yesterday we talked about the whole left brain. We got to stop the left brain and get the right brain activated. So the yoga process tries to do that. Again, does that. Vipassana, all these things try to do that, stop this left brain. So when we engage everything in Krishna, we accomplish the same thing, stop the left brain. But it doesn't look like it because we're using that same left brain along with the right brain to worship Krishna. But we're actually getting rid of the wrong function of the left brain in doing so. So it also accomplishes the same thing, activates our right brain, and goes beyond that, and activates the soul with devotion. So it doesn't just stop the left brain, it actually activates the soul with devotion. That's what bhakti does. So of all those processes, of course, the Yuga Dharma, the main process, is chanting the holy name, chanting the name of the Lord. This is the process that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu introduced 500 years ago. So chanting the holy name is the process by which we can overcome birth and death. At the end of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna, after explaining all the different yoga processes, just says that you do bhakti yoga. The process of devotion to the Lord is the most powerful. Abandon all varieties of religion, just surrender unto me, I shall deliver you from all sinful reactions, do not fear. But that's his process. And what does he promise? Where there's Krishna, the master of yoga, where there's Arjuna, the holder of the bow, there will be eternal prosperity, victory, ever-increasing wealth, and righteousness. So everything is given when we practice bhakti. The Lord takes care of everything. So that is how we get rid of birth and death, by practicing bhakti. Okay. Any question?
In relation to the subtle body, I just want to know, like, does that travel, for example, if a person is a devotee and practice devotional service throughout their life, at the time of death, when they leave the body, the subtle body goes to the spiritual world as well? Or
if the person is qualified to go to the spiritual world because they have prema, no, the subtle body is matter. It's actually matter. Mind, intelligence, ego, pranas are all matter. So they'll get left behind. So the soul will go, and he'll develop a spiritual body with spiritual senses.
How can we understand things which doesn't work under the influence of time?
What's that?
Like how can we understand things which doesn't work under the influence of time? Because sometimes in Bhagavatam we read things which is not affected by time.
Yeah.
So
Material, spiritual world.
It's really hard to understand how things doesn't work under the influence.
Yeah, well, here we have time, which is a destroyer, more or less. Over time, everything disintegrates. Everything changes. We have birth and death, karma, everything due to time influence. Beyond the material world, there is no birth and death. There is no destructive change. At the same time, we do find there is action. Okay? But the action always produces bliss. So it's a little bit different. So there is a different sense of time, not this time. It is a time which functions for the Lord to perform activities to produce bliss for the devotees. That's all. But it doesn't act as it does in the material world to give us our karma. So it's not destructive in the spiritual world. This time is actually a function of Maya. That time is not.
yesterday I thought of asking you, it's like in India, like sometimes for men, if left eye is blinking, something good is happening. They feel like, and if women, if its right eye is blinking, something bad is happening, something good is happening. So, is there any connection with respect to left brain and right brain?
Oh, Maybe, I've never thought about that, possibly. But that would assume that what the woman's left brain is the right brain, right? I don't think that works too well. But those are all called, what is it, sakana, or omens or something like that. There's different types of omens. How they work, we don't know, but they seem to have some relevance also.
Maharaj, you were talking about the memories passing, coming even like further than 1 or 2 lifetimes.
Oh yeah.
So, what does hypnotism do? Does it clear the memory, or sometimes people who are frightened of heights or of water by hypnosis, the fear is taken away. So, what does it actually do?
Yeah, well, I think in hypnosis there may be 2 ways. One is you can give a suggestion by which it's blocked. That may not be so nice or good. It's just like with a trauma, you may suppress the memory also. It doesn't actually, it's not so healthy ultimately. It will be service later on. So that's one way you can do it. The other is by understanding a previous experience, then you can resolve it. You understand the cause of this particular fear, you can deal with it, resolve it, and then you can solve the problem. That's another way of doing it. How the hypnotist does it, I don't know. That's probably the way they do it. This woman who had the fear, but just by the understanding, experiencing it again, and understanding that her cause now was because of that, she tended to get rid of that fear of closed rooms.
Just a question on the memory, same thing, and also the aspect of habit which you touched upon. So, is it because of the habit the memory gets produced, or is it because of the memory the habit comes in? So, what is the relationship between habit and the memory?
Well, I think a habit is probably a function of our mind. We call it laziness or whatever. We're lazy thinkers or whatever like that. So once we get into a little pattern after a few times, the mind gets a little lazy, just keeps repeating the same pattern over and over again.
Yeah.
So just like the example is given of a path in the forest. If we may have a path in the forest, and we go on the path because it's easy. There's no trees and no rocks and no grass. We go on the path to a nice place like that. But it may be a long path or whatever like this. And so there may be a short way of going to the next village or whatever, but there's no pathway, so we don't want to do it. So if we're really desperate to go quickly, then maybe we may make that short path. It may be difficult. But if we do it every day, then eventually the path gets worn down, and we can cut the trees out and whatever, and like the grass goes down and everything. And then it becomes an easy path, and then we can go to the place quickly. But it takes time and it takes energy to make that new path. Once it's established, yes, then we take it every day. But otherwise, we don't put the effort into it, then we'll just take the long route around. Generally, once some little habit is established, we just keep doing the same thing, thinking the same way because of that, because it's easy in the mind to do that. And it's probably a survival mechanism also. This is good because of this, and then it becomes stuck in our minds. And then whenever that thing occurs, this is bad because of this, automatic reactions like that happen. So we react in certain ways according to habit, because it seems to protect us. But then sometimes it doesn't work that way. The habit is applied in the wrong cases completely, and then we end up with a lot of problems.
Yeah, because that's where I'm coming from. Because when you come into Krishna consciousness, you've been, like as you said, because you're in the mode of ignorance because you're away from Krishna and stuff.
Yeah.
So if you want to put it in, because you don't have the likeness, you're coming through the habit process where you say by habit you do the bhakti yoga.
Mm-hmm.
Then
well, that's establishing a new habit, actually.
yeah, that's establishing a new
So that's what we call abhyas. Repetition creates a new habit.
Yeah, based on the repetition, you
Yeah.
get into that habit, and that puts into your memory state, and then from memory, you just do it as opposed to being an habit. It just happens. So
Yeah.
So that's what I'm struggling to understand in terms of how does that really disturbs your subtle body in terms of that gets put on
Yeah.
the subtle body once
Yeah.
it becomes an habit?
Yeah, so that we can say the brain or the subtle, but I don't know where it works. But anyway, the habit, a new habit is established there. But the other part of the bhakti is not just the action, which may be the habit, but the devotion behind it, that which is the real thing. So the action has to be coupled with the devotion. The devotion itself is emanating from the soul, not from the mind at all, not from the mind or the brain or the subtle body or anything. So that's the important part of the action also. So if we separate the two things, then we just have the action is going to be a little bit empty. Of course, the actions of bhakti even then do have some power to them, as in the case of Ajamil chanting the name Narayan with no devotion, still got rid of all his karmas. So even accidental or mechanical acts of bhakti have some effect. But if we want to get real good effect, then we have to actually involve the devotion of the Atma in it. Then it becomes very powerful. So that type of habit, is another habit, the habit of the soul. Developing the devotion to the Lord, surrender to the Lord, as opposed to enjoyment of matter.
Maharaj, you were talking about the impressions over a period of lives, how it actually influences the bodily appearance and all those things. Now, in our present birth, we can observe that, like we look similar, we have similar characteristics as our father or mother, the facial appearance is the same.
It's genetic, actually.
That is genetic.
Yeah.
Okay, so this one doesn't have anything to do with
Though there is some study people have done, I don't know if very accurate or not, they take pictures of people, so they take pictures like husband and wife. So generally after a while they begin to look like each other. Because they associate with the other so much, so their features kind of merge into something that they have common features after a while. Or a man and his dog, for instance. A man begins to look like the dog after a while. Whether it's true or not, I don't know. But that could be affected in this life itself, that subtly the image starts forming your body also somehow. So it's possible.
Maharaj, last verse you showed of Bhagavad Gita, that is quite hope-giving. It says like wherever there is Krishna the Supreme Lord and Arjuna the Supreme Archer, there will be opulence, victory. But we also see that in Arjuna's life there were a lot of problems and he had to go in forest for a lot of years.
Okay.
So is it that this opulence and victory is towards the end of life, like going back to spiritual world, or is it throughout?
Well, not necessarily. In the case of Arjuna, of course, all of these things were not karma or anything. Arrangements of the Lord were there for his pastimes only. That's all. So Arjuna was put under illusion during the battle of Hare, etc., so the Bhagavad Gita could be spoken. He wasn't actually bewildered really like that. So all these events in the whole story of Mahabharata are actually part of Krishna's arrangement only, so we can consider that as a normal case. In any case, even in that story, we find that ultimately Duryodhana and his brothers are defeated and the Pandavas get on the throne, so they win in the end. In the case of a devotee, he usually does not consider happiness and distress materially as very significant because it has to do with the material body. And he will attribute that to his past karmas and everything like that, and so he just ignores it. And he continues to worship the Lord in any case, whatever his material circumstances are. But in some cases, like in Bhagavad, we've seen many cases where the devotees were in high positions, like Ambarish or Dhruva or whatever, very high positions. What is that?
What is the difference between the birth and beyond the birth?
Beyond birth. Oh, so beyond, see, birth is only, is connected with death. If somebody is born, somebody dies. So therefore, it's actually under the law of karma. So if we want to get beyond birth, that means beyond birth and death. That means we have to get beyond karma. So the way we can do that is through bhakti. Of course, some people may say, oh, what's wrong with birth? But if we look in long term, then birth means we're subject to karma. And nobody likes the karma part of it. Birth okay, but we don't want the karma. But you get it anyway. So you get ups and downs in life due to karma.
How do you know if I did something and suffer the next life that is coming?
What's that?
If somebody is doing something wrong in the past life,
Yeah.
and next life,
Yeah.
suffer the different life, no
Yeah.
problem. So how do you know if I did this thing in the last life?
How do we know? Well, we don't. It is very difficult to trace out what suffering or what act caused what suffering or whatever. The general principle is there. It applies in this life also. So if you do a lot of bad acts in this lifetime, you generally suffer in this lifetime also, very badly. Yeah? So that just carries over. It's a principle that carries over into other lifetimes also. So we generally don't remember the particular acts we did in past lifetimes because it is very difficult to live one lifetime, this lifetime, what to speak of other lifetimes simultaneously. So everything else is blocked out and we just concentrate on this lifetime itself.
Maharaj, you talked about near-death experiences and past life regressions and as what do we call these science as material science or is it spiritual science?
The investigation of things like that.
Yeah, this past life regressions and hypnosis.
But it's material. It's material.
It's material science.
Yeah. And of course, it's dealing with subtle aspects, more subtle aspects, some of which we don't even know how they work. Like in hypnosis, we don't actually know how it works completely, you know. It's a little dangerous also in that sense.
Even past life regressions, like
Yeah, we can't also depend on them completely because in hypnosis, because you're in an alpha state, more or less, you can also pick up the ideas of the hypnotist. So hypnotist has to be very careful. He does not also make suggestions mentally into the person's brain or whatever like that. So it's a very subtle science actually. So we cannot always take the hypnotic regression as true because it may be simply a wish fulfilling of the person themselves or something they're taking out of the mind of the hypnotist. So, you know, it doesn't always work. In some cases where you get very clear things that can be proven, maybe it's okay. Where you actually get, you know, full details of a life and you can go and investigate and find it's true. And that's true. Other cases may not be so. It's wishful thinking or whatever.
How can we come out of this vicious circle of birth and death? So with Bhakti Yoga, can we get rid of this vicious circle or not?
Yeah, that's the only process that actually works for us. The other processes like yoga and jnana are very difficult and a little bit dangerous. So practical process is bhakti yoga and chanting the holy name. This will cut down all the karma and it will activate the soul's devotion and consequently our attraction to the material world will reduce and reduce. And we end up in the spiritual world.
One question, we talked about drugs and all these addictions as a way to just elevate oneself. What do we call when a person does some deadly or dangerous adventures or just do some
Extreme sports or something like that.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
It's all material. It's all material. As people are bored in the material world, so they need a little excitement, you know. So a little excitement, maybe fear and all that is part of the excitement. So that's what extreme sports are probably. Danger, you know. It also stimulates their adrenaline or something like that. So gambling again, it stimulates certain things in your body that gives you a little temporary thrill or whatever. All material. That has to do with the nervous system, actually. It's the brain and the nervous system, basically. So not very significant as far as actual bliss is concerned.
So when you do devotional service, these subtle body layers that you show in the pictures,
Yeah.
those will cut off or those will?
They get purified.
They'll get purified.
Yeah. All the bad impressions get extinguished, and then they may be useful for devotional services. This body can be useful.